We have a sunny afternoon here in Finland, and I'm Annika Ranta from Humap Ltd, and I'm really happy um, and cheerful that we could have you, Glenda, here with us for 45 minutes. You have been co-created and our partner in our thinking almost 15 years already, and that has been pleasure to learn so much in your global ecosystems with you. But hey, please, I would like to in Finnish style let you introduce yourself. How do you would like to do it?
Thank you.
Please.
I'm so pleased to be here with you, and it's a bright and sunny spring morning here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So our little lake is seeing spring sprout. So I'm just really pleased to be with you today. So I began my relationship with Humap years ago in London. I was teaching a class, and our friend Pekka came to the class, and he said, I think I have some people in Helsinki who would like to speak with you. And we have been speaking ever since. So I began working with complexity in the late 1980s, wondering how to make good decisions in uncertainty. And at that time, people thought that uncertainty was a mistake, and that if things were uncertain, it was because you weren't good enough in your planning and your practice. But over the last 30 years, almost 40 years, more and more the world has taught us that uncertainty is a real thing, and that ourselves and our families and our institutions need to be able to respond. So I now lead a network of about 900 people around the world in many different fields, many different roles, and all of them use our vision, which is to see patterns clearly, to seek to understand them, and then to act with courage to transform turbulence and uncertainty into possibility for all. So I live in Circle Pines, Minnesota. I love to write, I love to teach, and I love to engage with the most wicked and messy kinds of problems. So I'm very busy these days.
I can see that, but this has been really how could I say, weird spring, or even though year or 2 years, and I think that it connects somehow into this today's topic somehow. So we have opened up also here in house space the question that how is the time different in other time? What do you think? What does that mean to you, Glenda, at the moment?
Yeah, Annika, that's such a great question. And I think there are 3 ways that this time is different. Of course, every day, every moment, every era thinks that it's different than what came before. And of course it is. But I think there are 3 things that make this a particularly significant time of transformation. So one, of course, is the pandemic. For the first time in written history, everyone on the planet experienced something that was similar. Recognizing being afraid of, being concerned about a pandemic, and the fact that we closed down in different ways at different times, in different communities with different kinds of laws, still the whole of humanity had the same experience in the same moment or within the same month. And that, I think, really brings us together as humanity in a way we never were before. And so the patterns that we see become much clearer because we're all in the same place at the same time. The second thing is that because the connections and technology, things are changing so quickly, and signals are passing very quickly around the world. And so we can be connected with a friend who's in Vancouver, who came from the Ukraine, who's connected with WhatsApp to people who are on the ground in Kyiv. And we can hear from him and through him messages about what's happening halfway around the world before the public news channels have any either information or courage to speak. And
Mm,
so that kind
mm,
of connection makes information move so quickly.
mm,
And the third thing is there the diversity of our voices, our perspectives, our cultural histories, the kind of equity and desire for equity is really opening up. And so at the same time, based on a complex system, we have the boundaries that are opening up, we have speed of exchange, and we have differences that are multiplying. And so the
mm,
risk is that in those conditions, things get chaotic. You can't see what's going on. They're really surprising. So it becomes even more important that we build our pattern spotting skills so that we can make
mhm,
sense of things even when things are moving really quickly.
mm.
So um,
Yeah.
I know that's a big answer to a little question, but I believe this is really a time when pattern spotting becomes a survival skill.
Mm. Yeah, I can really feel it because I have noticing that first time with so loud voice has been talk about climate change as ecological issues because of pandemic. That has been interesting, swift somehow what has been happened, and also in really personal level I have been seeing that how what has been the patterns that has been shutting down the youngsters. My high school senior who has this spring just have opened up and meet all the friends and have those parties and balls and everything what should be these rituals which are really important for growing. Or of course also one big issue here in Finland when I'm living, that 1,300 kilometers border with our neighbor, and what is happening has been also maybe lifetime kind of a thing or pattern what has been created really important discussions here. So
Mm.
yeah, thank you for that story, also for the care that how people are connecting and how the collaboration is building something really up. This is happening. It's not just countries or boxes but it's more like connections, different ways of kind of uh, discussions and connections and relations. What are the things are keeping us going, or how those patterns are really emerging.
Yeah. One of the things that we saw in the pandemic,
Mm,
or that I experienced, and I suspect you did as well, is that being closed down and locked down
mm,
meant that many of my connections, business connections, professional connections, were weakened, but
mm,
my family connections became very strong. And
mm,
that focus on the people in my family and in my household just got really rich and deep. And I heard lots of parents speaking about the ways in which their relationships to their children had transformed as well.
mm. So many kind of transformations. And but
Mm,
I'm really curious when we created this title of this today's
mhm,
session, that you say that culture is a pattern. What do you mean by
mm,
that?
mm. Well, when we talk about systems, we think about complex systems where lots of different pieces and people interact with each other, and then something emerges greater than the sum of the whole. We think about that as culture.
Mhm,
So I used to think that culture was a solid, given thing. Like you could describe the culture of a state or the culture of a nation or the culture of a race as if it were an immovable object.
yeah.
But when we're thinking about complexity and when we're seeing things as fluid as they are now, then culture becomes instead an emergent pattern that is fluid and flowing, and maybe one thing in one place and another in another place. So we define patterns as similarities, which you certainly see in culture. Where do people belong? How do they feel belonging? What are the things that hold the culture together? The second thing in a pattern is, what are the differences? What are the differences that make a difference? And so when you think about even what anthropologists have said about culture and distinguishing one culture from another, what are the differences that make a difference? I have a funny Finnish story to tell you about that. But then
Okay.
and then the third thing is, how are things connected?
Mm.
Similarities, differences, and connections are what we think about as a pattern. So if you think about any culture, if you can talk about what's the same, what's different, what's connected, how do people connect, then that gives you a kind of a way to understand the culture as it's standing. So when we talk about differences that make a difference, speaking to culture and patterns like that. So two friends of mine from Finland have been here visiting in the United States, and we were driving around and showing them how much Minnesota looks like Finland, and we were having a really great time. And one of them looked at me and said, aren't there rules about flags? And I said, what? I don't understand. He said, well, in Finland, there are laws about the ratio between the length of a flagpole and the size of a flag. That if you have this size of flag, the flagpole has to be like, if you have this pole or flag, like, and of course, in the US, there's no such thing. We have enormous flags that drag the ground and little bitty ones up at the top of the, and so it was a real insight to me into the culture of Finland, where those are differences that make a difference. How you respect, what you see, what the design is, what balance is, the kind of regularity, the expectation that people align for the beauty of the whole. Is such a lovely picture of the Finnish culture and a funny one of the US. But that's why we think of culture as a pattern, because then if your culture is a pattern and my culture is a pattern, then when we come together, we can have a very interesting boundary of conversation and exchange and exploration and perspective, and create a pattern that belongs to all of us. Whereas if I think of one pattern here, one culture here, and one culture here, we come together, we just bump. But if they're patterns, then they can flow together and you can get synergy at the intersection.
How do you think that how patterns starting to emerge when they are changing all the time? What is it? What is it all about?
The experience I'm having with organizations, Annika, is that the individual experience shifts first. Now, those individuals may be in the senior leadership team, so they may be sitting in the C-suite, but it's personal individual transformation. Or maybe it's someone at the edge, or maybe it's someone in research and development. But a person somewhere sees something differently or sees something different. And that comes into their adaptive action, their cycle of saying, what am I seeing? So what sense can I make of that? And what am I going to do about it? And as individual people do that in different places and times, and then they talk with each other, then what emerges over time is a new pattern. So thanks for this complex adaptive systems picture, because it is the graphic representation of what we were talking about. So down at the bottom, Mary, Lou, Jane, Sam, and Larry, whoever they are, wherever they are in the organization, are having experiences with their family, with what they're reading, with the people they're talking with their professional organizations. And they bring those ideas into conversation with others. And as they do that, then new patterns begin to form. And as they do, as they set kind of standards and expectations, then everyone begins to move in a kind of synchronized way, like a flock of birds. And so we see culture, on the one hand, locked in because people know how they're supposed to behave and they continue to create the same patterns. But in times like these, the experiences are so different and the stressors are so strong that people begin to act differently. And so the pattern that emerges is different. Now, that doesn't mean that the pattern is always positive. In the US, we have this pattern emerging of radical terrorism and public violence, which has emerged not because somebody says we should do that, but because individual crazy people get crazy ideas and begin to do crazy things. And then before long, we're recognizing that as a culture, we're having to adjust our behaviors in response to those crazy things that emerge. So just because it self-organizes doesn't mean it's always healthy.
Yeah, and useful in that way that produces something which is more productive or more essential for the culture. Yeah. What are the agents here
in culture?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's a very good question. They're at all different levels. So in some ways, the culture can be inside me, my emotions and my thoughts and my physical well-being, that is one level where I, as an individual, am creating a pattern of the culture in me and a team. So it may be that the agents are team members, and as they interact together and see what's possible and take action together, then the team becomes a high-performing team. Or perhaps it's a neighborhood or a family or an organization. So many of the clients that you work with begin in the institutional question about what is our culture? Is it serving us well? And if not, what do we need to do to shift it? And then institutions work together and create industries, and industries work together and create economies, and economies work together and create an environment of a physical environment. So at the same time, we have lots of complex adaptive systems coming there. The ones about building culture that are patterns, but we have the same thing that's happening in climate change, in the climate crisis, or in public health issues, in responding to COVID, or in domestic violence, or in public international violence, or in NATO. So we have the members of NATO who come together to form the NATO alliance. And even that in these moments are changing.
Exactly. That was really interesting. I also noticing that somehow also our ways to think or connect ourselves, that starting, and leadership also ways, or this have a discussion has been changed somehow at the moment. It's a lot of discussion about self-organizing organizations, but also at the same time how to coordinate our thoughts and notice those patterns and do to them something. And I feel that this transparent kind of thinking, we also at Humap trying to support and contain with our customers. So how to really know that where our thinking is, how to connect really in this era where we have every kind of technical equipment available, but still something is hidden and take time and changing all the time. So this kind of shift in how we reimagining work is also happening somehow. It connects in my mind somehow what you just told.
This is one of the reasons why it's been such a wonderful experience working with Humap all these years. I think long before the rest of us were aware of these emerging patterns and the fluidity and flexibility and generativity, the liveliness of culture, the fact that it's a living thing. I think that there were things in your conversations and your experiences and what you shared with your clients when you would come together very early, when you would come together as a Humap team, talking with each other, learning together. Those seeds of a way of being together in organization was for me a real marker of what the rest of the world would come to over the future, or at least my hope was that they would. And I believe that you've continued to emerge in that way, building your own skills for what shows up on the right side of this map, to say, not just that you teach other people to do it, how to do things, but that you become yourselves the knowledge and the insight and the capacity that you want to share with others. So when you walk into a room or into an organization, you bring that pattern with you because it's so deeply embedded in Humap. And I believe I've never known an organization that held so deeply into this emergent, growing, learning, healthy culture. And it's not always perfect, but it's always striving to be perfect.
Thank you. This is, it's getting, it's, wow, what words, but I think that you can listen so many levels. Also by listening and the organizational listening and different ways, and also through sensing and sense making together with organizations, and therefore I would really like to introduce what is this adaptive action all about, because there has been our invitation, some wordings about it, but please say something. What is it? How to use it in how does it scale itself in different kind of purposes, for example?
That's a great question. Well, and you know, when we start talking about adaptive action, it's hard for me to stop. So very early when we were working in complexity work, more people talked about understanding and seeing and describing what was going on and trying to figure out everything. And it was all very in language and just in thought and trying to figure things out. People kind of got caught in that. And I looked at my clients and they really needed to be doing stuff. They did want to understand. That was important. They wanted to stay connected to the outside world. They wanted to understand things, but they also needed to act. And so if you try to separate the understanding and action, then neither of them makes much sense. So we looked for a way that we could bring understanding and action and connection all together. And that was the birth of adaptive action. So it is, and let's just start with an individual. So here you and I are doing adaptive action. We say, what did you just say? So what does that evoke for me? What does that mean for those who are listening? What does that mean for the past and the present and the future? So what? Making sense? And then now what am I going to do about it? Take action, move forward. And because the system is so entangled and so complex, everything you do makes a difference. And so you begin again. What, so what, now what? So individually we do it, but it's also true that we do it as teams. What's our goal? So what are our gifts? Now what's our plan? We do it as organizations. What do our customers need? So what is our capacity to meet those needs? Now, what are we going to do? We do it as nation states. What is the health and well-being of our population? So what is important about that? What are our capacities? What are the resources? Now, what will we do? So at every level, this is the way that we take action, even if we can't predict and control. So in slower times, in more orderly times, in more predictable times, our planning didn't look like this. Our planning looked like a straight line. What do we need to do? So what's all the data? So what are the risks? So what are we going to do? Okay, let's do it. Then we're done. Check. That was how we thought we could work, because the world stood long enough for us to go through that cycle. But people who were effective in those systems were always doing this learning cycle, learning action cycle, all the time. Explicitly, it looked like a straight line, but you know, the real heroes, the real leaders, the real guides of your life, think about the things they said about how they're seeing things and how are they making sense of stuff, and What are they planning to do in that cycle going through and through? So in a way, it's perfectly obvious common sense.
Mm.
This is
Mm.
how little ones learn to walk, basically. So, I mean, it doesn't get any more fundamental than this.
Mhm.
But in these times of emerging patterns, we have to rediscover it, get better at it, and do it together, not just do it individually.
What kind of experience do you have in organizational context or ecosystem or network kind of context with that? How does that sense making
Mm.
happen?
So I had a client who came to me some years ago. They wanted to build a network in the lower Mekong among people who did ecological work and um, social justice work and government reform. And there were 5 different countries, 7 different languages,
Mm.
8 different disciplines, everything from mechanical engineering to ecological services and attorneys, across this very large physical space that was just tied together with the Mekong River. There was nothing else that
Mm.
tied it together. But they wanted people to come together in shared action. And they said, how are we going to do this, make this network? And my first question was, well, what is currently there? What connections are there across these spaces? What are the things that you do see? What are shared? Thinking about patterns, what do they have in common? What are the differences that make a difference? And how are they talking to each other? So what can we do? We brought them together in a meeting.
Mm.
And it was outdoors. And representatives from all these different organizations came. And at first we thought we were going to tell them what we were going to do and make a straight line plan. But in the first 15 minutes, we realized that was not the place to go.
Mm.
And so we established opportunities for them to talk with each other so that they were sharing their adaptive actions. What are you doing? So what have you seen recently? Now, what might we do together? And they would do this in pairs and trios and perspectives and all around. And by the end of 3 days, there was a network. And so we were able, by encouraging, by our doing our own adaptive actions, by inviting each of them to do their own, and by inviting them to come together to do them in groups, we moved into a very active kind of organic network space, which then we started to build an organization around because we didn't want to kill it. We knew if we turned it into a steering committee and 16 rules and the rule book and all, we knew that that weight would kill the network. But if it didn't have anything, it would just dissipate over time, kind of break up and
Yeah.
disappear. So we spent the next year trying to figure out what's the right touch of structure that would keep the liveliness of the network, but give it
Mm.
some focus. And that structure has continued to emerge and change over time. So that's at the large network scale. At the lower scale, we have associates who work in healthcare in Canada who tried to respond to the COVID epidemic. And all at the same time, they had demands and they had challenges and they didn't know what to happen. They had to manage their long-term care and their emergency rooms and their
Mm.
special ICUs, and they were overwhelmed.
Mm.
And what we helped them do was to say, all right, where I'm standing right now, given what I know right now, what can I do? And then to do it and then see what happens. And then the next time and the next time. And so whether it was a nurse in an emergency room or a CEO running a whole system, healthcare system, each of them was doing their adaptive action. One CEO, this
Mm.
in a large health authority, not in the US, looked around and she said, I have lots of technical experts managing all the technical aspects of COVID-19. They are doing what they need to do. I don't need to do their work. She said, my work is holding the pieces together and making sure the people are taken care of. And so she began making her rounds. So she would put on her tennis shoes every day and she would go from one place to another facility, being present, checking in, doing what she could, carrying messages one place to another. And that she saw herself as the caregiver to the caregivers. And that was her role as a chief executive officer. And that was her adaptive action.
Wow.
So those are just some of the examples that we've seen of times when it can seem overwhelming. You don't know what to do. The world is changing so fast. Everything you used to do is no longer working. You feel stuck. What can you do? You simply pause and you say, what am I seeing in this moment? So what does it mean? Now what can I do?
Thank you. Yeah, you're so wonderful to put enormous things into some small sentences, and still that is working. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
What do you now it's a tougher question in that kind of perspective, that how you could put this question that if we are using in organization, we have business goals and objectives and kind of processes and everything, and IT system and those issues, but and we are waiting some kind of benefits or results or proceedings, what word this could be, KPIs, and these. So how this could be helpful?
Yeah. So first of all, I don't think KPIs are bad things. There are many people who look at emergent systems that say we don't want KPIs. I believe there are parts of the system that are and should be under control. If you don't do that, then you're not using your resources wisely. So to have something that's structured and predictable, but if you have only that, then the world moves off and leaves you behind. So adaptive action allows you to constantly critique your KPIs in the context of the world. Where are we now? Are we where we need to be? How will we go the next step? So it's like a learning cycle above your structured plan or within. So one is it lets you adjust and adapt and stay connected to the world. The second is adaptive action lets you work at multiple levels at the same time. So sometimes a team will get so preoccupied with its work that it forgets how it fits into the greater whole. And when it does that, it becomes not very productive. So adaptive action allows you to think about your work, but it also allows you to think about the work of the whole and how you fit in it. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is, and I know this is going to sound strange, but it gives people hope that if you know that whatever happens, you'll be able to find something to do. Nothing is intractable. That wherever you are, whatever's happening, there's something you can find to take action. And so it helps you not feel so helpless and hopeless in the midst of rapid change. So what benefits have you seen, Annika, as you've used adaptive action with yourself and your clients? What are some of the benefits you've seen?
I think that that kind of it moved me a little bit, your notion about that. It gives hope. I felt really little bit get moved, and when I talked about your experience about the key, for example, that even though from there in basement people are starting to learn adaptive action, and I think that in my experiences it gives allows people to think and make notions or reflections about what is happening. And then maybe the sharing part is really important, noticing that there's a totally different aspects, and anything is it's not the same from different aspects or angles. So we have really transcontextuality and different kind of elements ongoing all the time, but we don't know. We just see the one part of the whole, and then we're starting to see the bigger picture, and then the understanding and sense making and the clicks have starting to grow or emerge or evaluate or connected, or even happen strange things even. So that kind of stuck issues can have more humanity or explanations or background or understanding, and then it starts to go more fluid. I don't know, it's sounds maybe weird, but something happens in thoughts.
Yeah. Annika, in the middle of March in 2020, we've been doing a lot of work with healthcare organizations, and we knew they would not have time to meet with us or to talk with each other. They were going to be way too busy. So we thought about what we could do to help them in their moment of need. And we started then a practice, which we continue to today. Every day at the same time, people come on a Zoom call and someone brings a wicked issue. And they describe the wicked issue just in 2 or 3 sentences. And then everyone asks them questions, which they don't answer. They just listen to the questions for about 15 minutes. And then at the end, after they've listened to the questions, then they reflect a bit on what they might do. Now, this is an adaptive action cycle, right? What's the wicked issue?
Yeah.
So what are all the questions? Now, what can you do? And the questions are asked by a combination of people. They come from around the world, all different kinds of walks of life, all different kinds of questions, all the different kinds of places that they are. So sometimes the question like, what would a 6-year-old say about this wicked issue? Or where do you feel it in your body? Or what's the center? What's at the center of this wicked issue, and what's at its edge? Questions like that really open up what might happen. So usually we think about questions as being narrowing in to find an answer. You narrow, and so it's really a convergent process. But this, we call it the power of questions, and it's divergent. So you start, you're stuck, you don't know what you're going to do. And so as people ask questions, you think, oh, yeah. And people say it's like the door is opening and the air is coming in to be able to see more broadly. And it gets people unstuck. And so every day, Monday through Friday, 10 o'clock in the morning, my time, for 30 minutes, and then we hang up.
Wow.
And we've done it for every Monday through Friday since March the 15th, 2020. So this is like session 800, I can't remember, some very large number. And each one has had a different kind of wicked issue, sometimes very personal, sometimes very global, about why don't people wear their masks in public, to my brother is getting out of prison tomorrow and I have to take care of him and I'm really, really angry with him. What am I supposed to do? To I just found out that my spouse has terminal cancer. What happens next? To I am so mad at my teenage son. I think I'm going to kill him. Everything, all the whole range. What am I going to do with my life? How am I going to find a path forward? Yeah. And so that benefit of finding hope, finding possibility, opening up, getting unstuck.
Yeah.
So anybody who wants to join us is welcome to join us. I'll put the link. Link. We've also recorded all of them, so they're all online. And some people just put them on in the background and listen to them as if they were music in the background.
I have still, Glenda, one really important question for you in the end, but this is something that how we would in Humap thinking about how to making visibility to those blind spots, and then we can have different kind of adaptive actions ongoing in that perspective, which is needed, and then we can, that is changing already. Then the picture is maybe also too linear. It could be more, whole picture could be more. I just learning all the time here, and I think that how to, for me, the most important thing also how we reimagining work and try to do that from separated ideas and thoughts more to co-created and adapted kind of modified, all ongoing, all the time ongoing kind of actions. And that is something that we would like to help, and that is our purpose in the world, to make possibility and connection with that. That is really in heart-rooted purpose for us, how to reimagine work.
That is so exciting. If you go back a slide, you say it looks straight, but it's a circle. Notice you've got the arrow at the bottom. And so it's an adaptive action circle. What? And then so what in the middle? And then now what? And it is a circle. You can just put little curves on the edges.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. That's another thing that I think is a real gift of Humap, is to put theory and kind of generalized perspective into concrete terms that people can use. So your ability to translate these principles into what's useful is just really powerful. I love those two graphics. Love them.
This is quite a big question, I know, and we have maybe a couple of minutes here time to go, and maybe some thoughts that are just now coming, that where do you see hope in building, reimagining work and building up leadership, these connections between people? So
yeah, it's a good question. I don't see it in institutions. I don't see it in past practices. I don't see it in best practices. I don't see it in technology. I don't see it. I see it in individual passion and humanity. That each person, wherever they are, doing the best that they can with whatever they've got, that's how we're going to get through whatever comes. I think that about our friends in the Ukraine. I think of that about our friends in metropolitan US. I think that about our Black friends who are defending themselves from the police in the US. I think that about a mother down the street. I think that about all of us who stand in the places that we do, that if each of us is able to see and understand and influence, to do our own adaptive actions, we will bit by bit transform turbulence and uncertainty into possibility. That's where I see the hope.
Thank you, Glenda, for your time with us all. I think that you have moved our thoughts and emotions and thinking and ideas and in different places, and that's good. That is the purpose. And I'm really happy that we could have you here with us today. I'm a little bit saying something that in Finnish. And next, our webinar will be about the ecosystems and ecosystem strategies, connects also really with this Perttu Pölönen futurist and Jere Talonen from Humap are then inviting us together. But Glenda, warm thanks to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And for the work you do at Humap, and tell all of my friends there hello.
Yes.
And I'm glad to be back on a plane. I can come visit you.
Yes, good. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you, and to your lovely community.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.